everybody. We want to thank you all for coming, and we want to give an extra round of applause for our great thanks for our panelists today. We have a wonderful group of leaders joining us today. We have Dr. Kristen Kelly, who's the chair of dermatology. We have Dr. Peter Kaiser, who's the chair of biological chemistry. Dr. Shalini Shah, who's vice chair in anesthesia and division chief of pain services. And then Dr. Robert Bristow, who is the chair of OBGYN. And so we want to thank them all for coming. And we do encourage you to post questions in the chat. Brian and I will be monitoring them, but we also have some questions for our panelists, and we'll just get that conversation going. And I'll just start with the first question is, and not all of you have to answer the questions. You know, we can take 2 or 3 answers per question and just have this great conversation this evening. But the first question I have is, what motivated you to pursue a leadership role in your department or in the medical school? Like, why you were really interested in pursuing leadership? And how about we start with Kristen?
Well, I think that some people, maybe this is kind of like some people, know from when they're in kindergarten or something that they want to be a doctor and go to medical school. And maybe some people know from early on that they want to be a leader. I'm not sure that that was exactly, my approach. I actually was in private practice for a short period of time, kind of working part-time many years ago at the university doing some clinical trials. And then I came back full-time because I really loved being able to do teaching and research and administrative stuff in addition to my clinical practice. And so I guess just over time, I was asked to be residency program director. And so I was that for 15 years. And I really like working with people. And I really like problem solving, which I think are 2 things that are, working with people, or I like connecting people, et cetera, advocating for people. And so I think those have helped me in my leadership roles. And so I think a little bit I kind of stumbled upon it, but it's something that I enjoy doing and so have continued to do.
Wonderful. Peter, would you like to share how your journey into leadership?
Yeah, I can share that, and I can be very honest. I never thought I would do that or I want to do that at all, and I really stumbled on it. So there was, a transition in the department. I was vice chair for a few years. The chair stepped down. I didn't want to become chair. I never wanted that, as I said. But I agreed to be interims chair, and I sort of liked it in the end. And motivation probably was because you always complain a lot about, what the department chair is doing. And if you really want to, bring in your ideas, then you have to take on that position, and you have the chance to actually do what you think is right. And what you quickly realize is that it's actually, I mean, a lot of people complain to you, and you only hear the complaints, and it's easier to be outside when as doing it actually and be the chair. Yeah, but it's enjoyable, and you can bring in your ideas, and I'm compassion for people and try to help them. Yeah.
Thank you. Shalini?
Um, why leadership? I think, well, for me, I think it's the same sentiment that most people have echoed here. I didn't really see myself like, some people have a 1-year trajectory, 5-year trajectory, or 10-year trajectory. I always joke that I don't even know what I'm going to wear tomorrow, let alone where I'm going to be or what I'm going to do. I think for me, I kind of approached my career, and I can only talk about, my career or my profession from a growth mindset, if you will, and kind of being an above the line value player or adding value to our organization or to anywhere that you work or where we work. And so the thing that I've learned through that process is that, everyone has their own trajectory timeline. And so when you put constraints on yourself that I want to be this position by this year, or I want to do this by this time, I think you're just limiting yourself. I think it's really important that we work along people that we really admire, because I think that life is definitely too short to not work with colleagues that are admirable, and really having a vision of what you expect out of yourself and for your team. And that's kind of been my approach.
Thank you for sharing. Rob, do you want to share why you pursued leadership?
Yeah, thanks, Namisha. I didn't really pursue it. I sort of fell into it. It's a typical story. I was 4.5 years out of fellowship and junior faculty attending at Hopkins, and my senior partner and division director passed away unexpectedly at age 47. And basically, I didn't really want to work for anybody else that didn't share that vision that we had. And so eventually I was offered that position and ended up taking over the division director job and the fellowship director job 5 years out of fellowship. I had no idea what I was doing. And so that was the spur that made me want to go off and get an executive MBA to get better at that job. And then when I moved here to UCI, I did that job for about 8 years and then moved here to UCI in a lateral move to take over as division director here at UCI because all of our family's on the West Coast. And it was a priority for me to get our family closer to our nuclear family, closer to our extended family. And so I saw that as a win-win. I didn't see that as a lateral move at all. And so I was here for 5 years, and then the existing chair at the time, Manny Porto, was stepping down and moving on to UPS president. And I was offered the position of chair, and it was kind of the same thing. I really didn't want somebody else telling me what to do, how to do my job. So I decided, well, okay, I'll do that. But it was also, I could see how I would have a bigger impact in the field of women's health, having that influence, right? And being able to oversee 28 residents and 16 fellows and a clinical and administrative staff over 100 people, and really being able to prioritize things like diversity and equity and inclusion across the training program, but also across the faculty complement, and prioritizing community service. And so it was really like the leadership piece had to have meaning. It wasn't just chasing a title, because sometimes it's easy to get wrapped up in that. And I've never felt I'm like not a title hoarder. Like I don't need a bunch of titles. I have a high need for achievement and a low need for credit. I just like, so if the opportunity presents itself for you to have an impact, then yes, pursue it. But if you're just trying to get another line on your CV, you're better off spending time at home with your kids, But anyway, that's kind of how I fell into the current leadership role.
So this is a great panel because many of you did not plan, all of you never planned on it, but you've all become very successful leaders in academic medicine. So now that you've been in your roles and you lead different people and you see the impact that you have, what qualities do you think are essential for a successful leader in academic medicine? Any one of you guys can start. Kristen, do you want to start?
Sure. I think there are a number of good qualifications. I think you should be a good listener. So I think you need to, listen to the people. I like to, honestly, I mentioned it before, but I really like to connect people and to advocate for people. So one of the things we talk about in our department a lot is not just mentorship, but sponsorship, looking for opportunities for people, trying to promote people in positive ways. And I think you have to be able to sacrifice yourself a little bit. I mean, you have to sometimes sacrifice time. Sometimes you have to sacrifice some of the other things you want to do in your career. Not that it has to be that way, but I mean, I think being willing to serve people and wanting to do that is an important part.
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah. I agree with Kristen's comments 100%. I think really I think the farther along you progress in the leadership trajectory, the more you have to adopt the perspective of being a servant leader and put your own priorities and accolades to the side, right? Like I really, it's like if there's something to take credit for, you push somebody else out front to take credit. And if there's something to take blame for, you step up and take the blame for it, because ultimately it's about empowering the people around you and the people that you're supposed to be leading and giving them responsibility, but you always having accountability for what happens. And sometimes that works out great, and sometimes it becomes much more of a learning experience, and you just have to be able to embrace that journey. But I would, if there were a couple of qualities, I would say humility is super important. Like practice that always. Like, just remember, nobody's ever irreplaceable. Uh, and it's just like humility is like should be a daily practice for a good leader. There's something called the Colin Powell doctrine that I read years ago in Powell's leadership lessons. And for those young folks, he was a very famous military general that was in Desert Storm. But the one thing I took out of that book was don't ever ask anybody to do something you're not willing to do yourself. Right? Like it's like that's how you lead from the front. You don't have to be a cheerleader about it, but if it's something that's really unpleasant and you're not willing to do it, then don't ask somebody else to do it for you. I think, and then I think the last thing I would say is there needs to be, as a leader, especially in the medical field, there needs to be a sort of a genuine authenticity to you as a leader, as an academician, as a teacher, as a clinician, and just as a human, right? Like people that you're leading, they have to be able to relate to you and see you as another person. And we've tried really hard in our department to flatten our leadership structure and not have this hierarchical model, right? So it's super important that I think people feel that everybody's approachable and that we're all just doing the same job, right? At different levels, but everybody is important, and just trying to speak to that. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Peter, you lead in basic science. Do you have anything else that you do differently or feel that would be different for a successful leader in academic medicine on the research side?
It's probably a little different because we don't have the clinical responsibility. But I agree with everything general what was said. Yeah, humility is very important, and that you step up and do your service as well, and show people that you're not just delegating, but you actually do something as well. But I think in the basic sciences, it's important that your faculty respects you as a scientist. That's very important. So your research should go on as much as possible and should be successful. You write your grants as well, get your funding. I think that's essential in the basic sciences. And you have a broader area of interest in research areas, not just your own field, but you have to understand, the broader fields and what the trajectory is, what's interesting, what's on the horizon. I think that's a little different, maybe because we're more focused on research and teaching. Yeah.
So one thing I would add to that, I've heard lots of great suggestions and common characteristics of leadership. And the one thing I didn't hear that I would add is I think it's important to have some transparency so that you're going to make decisions that people don't agree with, because you have to sometimes. But if you're transparent about how you got to that position, you've taken input, you make your decision because you're the leader and you explain to everybody and you communicate well what that was, then at least they understand how we got to where we are now. And then I think I like that idea about authenticity because I kind of wrote notes to myself about having a genuine concern for the task or the topic at hand. Like if you're genuinely interested in the well-being of your junior faculty or of the department or the residents that you're working with, if they see that genuine concern and interest, that goes a long way to people respecting what you're trying to do. So I guess speaking of that kind of approach, there are difficulties that come up with being leadership. And so maybe if you guys could address a difficult challenge that you faced in your leadership role, and how did you overcome a challenge? So maybe we'll just go back to you, Peter.
What is challenging is, the UC system, at least in the basic sciences, is a little different because we are very democratic. So it's not always that the faculty agrees with your opinion. And so you have to respect that. And that happens, not too frequently, but it does happen quite a bit. and you just have to respect that opinion, the faculty vote, and be behind that opinion of the faculty. I think that's something that is maybe different in other university systems where the chairs have much more power, if you will. But I think it's good the way it is at the UC system. So I like that. So you get input from a lot of faculty, try to balance their views and go with whatever the faculty decides to do and support that.
Yeah, that's a difficult situation. Shalini, do you want to give an example of a difficult challenge you've had to overcome in your leadership role?
Yeah, I think, academic medicine in itself it's an interesting beast because um, academic medicine, we're not immune to market forces. And sometimes there are very small margins in terms of what we're trying to achieve or what we can play with to achieve what we're trying to achieve. Um, I would say that, building on what the others have said before, yes, humility, trust, and transparency, absolutely. And I realized that we also need to ensure psychological safety within our teams. I don't know if you all know what that means, but sometimes we need people in our teams to feel safe at voicing their opinions and coming to leaders with issues or problems or even, solutions. Um, I really truly believe that healthcare itself, whether it's academic medicine or not, but healthcare itself is highly matrix. And I'm sure you guys have heard that. And what that means is that an org chart means nothing in our organization, right? Just because I report to you doesn't mean that I will something to happen means it's going to happen. It really, really in a setting like ours really requires trust. And one of the things that I've learned um, is who we hire, who we choose. That's been a particularly challenging, I would say, not challenging, but a growth aspect for myself because, it's really important that we don't hire to the job description. In fact, I don't believe that job descriptions really exist for academic faculty. Really, you want to hire people for what you want them to do. Particularly in an organization like ours. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is that one of the challenges is that there's a generational difference amongst faculty. And so you've got senior faculty, trained 20, 30 years ago in your department alongside folks who've just finished training. And there's a really great book if you haven't had a chance to read. It's called Generations. And I always cite this book because it's interesting that in the workforce right now, in the US workforce, there are actually 5 generations that are actually alive. And each one has its own preferences of what they want and expect out of work and comp and things like that. And that's been one of the challenges for me is how do we make all of those generations fulfilled in the workplace that we have? So I'm still learning, working on that, but that's been a particular challenge of mine.
Wow, and I'm sure for a lot of people, in fact, that's a
Yeah.
lot to handle, and I can't even understand the closest generation to me. So, Robert, how about you with a challenge?
Well, there's like daily, right? Everything from faculty to trainee issues to clinical care outcomes to everything. Um, I think there are two principles or two techniques, I guess, that I've used that help with difficult situations, whatever that may be. One is called second position, and it's an analogy that comes from the world of negotiation. So you imagine two parties sitting across the table doing a negotiation from each other. First position is how it looks to you. Second position is how it looks to the person that you're negotiating with. The third position is how it looks to somebody that's standing next to your table, watching the two of you interact with this negotiation. And the fourth position is how it looks to the universe. And the most important one of those, I think, is the second position, is being able to put yourself into the position of the person that you're either negotiating with or you're having a difficult conversation with, or a faculty member that you're having to discipline, or a trainee that you're having to dismiss from the program, or a family member of a patient who had a bad outcome as a result of a mistake that one of your faculty members made and is filing a lawsuit. Like putting yourself into that second position and trying to see the situation from the perspective of somebody else is enormously valuable, right? Like that will just frame the context for what you need to do and how you need to handle things so that both your priorities as well as the priorities of the person that you're dealing with can be hopefully addressed. The second technique that I've used with difficult situations is kind of one of self-image, really. And so I ask, especially with a difficult scenario where it's something I don't want to do, I ask myself, am I the type of, and then you fill in the blank, chair that would not have a difficult conversation with a faculty member because it made me uncomfortable? Or and the answer is going to be no, right? And so like creating that positive self-image for yourself of what you aspire to be and the principles that you aspire to uphold makes it, at least for me, a lot easier to just embrace and dive into those difficult scenarios as trying to live up to that self-image that I've tried to create for myself. So yeah, I don't want to get into a specific circumstance because
Sure.
we would be here till tomorrow morning if we did that. But I think like they're hard to deal with. But so I think individually you got to come up with little techniques that make those things easier for you and allow you to be confident and uphold your own self-image and your principles so that you feel like you're doing the right thing. And if you've done the wrong thing, acknowledge it and apologize, right? Like that's part of being human and just being an approachable leader too.
Excellent. And you can hear that executive MBA coming through there. So, Kristen, have you an example to give or something to add?
Well, I think that these are all excellent answers, and I agree again with everything everyone's saying, because I think all of the people here are really great leaders for a variety of reasons. Again, I think as Rob would say, I could come up with probably 50 examples, and no one wants to be here all night. But one other thing I would add is, maybe it goes back to the humility that Rob was talking about a little while ago. But I also try to surround myself with people from multiple different aspects of the department, and I try to listen to what they say. I try to listen to what people are telling me, and then I also, although I ultimately have to be responsible for a variety of decisions and things, I try to listen to different perspectives, think them all through. Also try to get out of my own head. Again, as Rob was saying, try to look at the perspective of others, and then to figure out a way that I can come up with a solution in the best way possible to help the most amount of people. That's not always easy to do, for sure, but at least listening to other people and knowing that. It's just like we know in academics, you can't know everything. You just can't. There's too many things to know in the world. So trying to get input from others can be very helpful.
Agree with that 100%. The other thing I would add is like if you're faced with a really difficult situation, a big problem that you got to solve, and it's acute and kind of crazy, don't respond by email right away. Like give yourself a half an hour, 2 hours to think about it, to consult with others, as Kristen was saying, get a different perspective, but like just simmer down and let it marinate for a bit, and then compose yourself before you decide how you're gonna dive into it.
That is definitely great advice. Of course, then on the other end, I'm like, why isn't he answering my email? Clearly he's deliberating about the complex dilemma that's going on.
He's still typing.
Well, that's the trouble with text messaging. Yeah. They're still typing, so don't do that either. Pause and reflect. So you did mention balance, so let's pivot to that concept of balance. I'm a firm believer in that there isn't any balance, so please show me that I'm wrong and tell us, how are you able to balance clinical responsibilities, leadership, research, and your other academic duties? So Rob, because your mic's open, let's start with you about.
Yeah, this is actually my favorite question of the ones that you submitted. And I think it's actually not quite the right question, at least for me.
Reframe
right? So
it.
I think everyone that's probably on this Zoom is going to be pretty competent from a clinical perspective, has an interest or expertise in teaching and or research. And those things are constantly going to be there. For me, the biggest challenge has always been balancing all of those things with leadership and family and your outside priorities, and having a balanced life, right? Like, the famous UCLA basketball coach, John Wooden, he talks about being balanced. in basketball. If you're too far on your heels, you're going to fall over. If you're too far on your toes, you're going to fall over. You have to have balance, but it's this metaphor for life. And it's the same thing. Like I have a system I call plate management. So it's like you have a fixed size of your plate and you can only put so much food on it. And so if you're taking on a bunch of new responsibilities, you got to push some stuff off of that plate. So when I did the executive MBA back at Johns Hopkins, I knew that that was going to suck 8 to 10 hours a week out of my time. And so I acknowledged that my research productivity was going to go down during that period of time. And I said, that's fine. Like, this is my priority and this is how I'm going to invest in it. But my general rule is if I spend more than 15% of my time a week, like 3/4 of a day a week, and I feel overextended and stressed out, then I have too much on my plate. And I got to start shedding some stuff off because it's too much. So for me, really the big exercise has been balancing the teaching, research, clinical, and the administrative leadership with being present at home. We have a complicated home life. We have 2 adult kids with intellectual disabilities, one with severe physical disabilities, who's got a wheelchair and a hospital bed and a tracheostomy and a feeding tube. And so it's really important for me to be present at home and participate in my family life and make that contribution. And so for me, like having those priorities set makes the decision making and the balance like really, really easy. You know, if I'm overextended, that's a great opportunity. I'm going to take a pass. Like our Society of Gynecologic Oncology has been trying to get me to be the society president for 10 years. And every year I'm like, no, thank you. I'm not going to do it because I'm going to have to be gone a week out of every month, traveling around the country doing meetings. So it would be great. I'd probably be good at it. But in the larger scope of things, my kids are not going to care if I was president of some society or something. They're just going to know whether I wasn't there at home. So I think for me, the real question is how do you balance all of those job related things with your actual self as a human and a spouse and a partner and a parent and a son or daughter. Like that's the art part where you're the nuance. And I think you have to give yourself grace, realizing you're not going to be perfect at either one of those jobs. You're not going to be perfect in your academic clinical scientist job, and you're not going to be perfect at home. But doesn't mean you can't be really good at both. So cut yourself some slack, give yourself some grace, try really hard, but keep your priorities in order, and so that you feel like you're aligned as a person. That would be my advice.
All right, I'm thinking I'm glad we're recording this because then but we should not post on the website so we can sell it to an MBA program because this is valuable advice. Kristen, how about your perspective?
Again, I think very good comments. I would say I think it's a constant challenge. I'm always trying to think about things in rebalance. I think what Rob said is very important from multiple aspects. I think, there are times you have to say no, and I have said no, saying, look, I want to, when I choose to do something, I want to do it the best that I can. And right now, this is not the time for me to do a really good job at this position. So I think sometimes you have to do that. At the same time, you do have to watch for opportunities. So you have to decide what are the opportunities that are going to be best and then be willing to take those on. I also think what he said is very important in terms of overall balance in life. And I'll be honest, that has been a tough one for me sometimes. My kids and my family, they're all older now, but very important to me, of course, as everyone's family is important to them. And, I just had to make sure that there were times. That also means I will often send emails sometimes early in the morning with the idea, not that anyone answers them then, but I'd send it first thing in the morning because when my kids were little, that was the time I had an hour of quiet before anything else happened. And so it was a good time for me to be able to get things done. That may not be the right time for someone else, but for me, that was the time where I could focus on that so that there were other times that I could focus on other important aspects.
All right. Thank you. Shalini?
We often hear this question, how do you balance work and life and work-life balance and things like that? For me, it's I'm going to be honest with you, a very practical answer. It's a nanny. And that's the reality of it. I have a live-in nanny. And to be honest, you always, I have children in elementary, middle, and now going into high school. And you wonder how you're going to balance that. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and I never had to see my maternal role model ever balance things because there was balance in the home. But now with two working parents, which is the reality for almost all of us, is that everyone needs to do a balancing act. And so for me, it's having a nanny who, and not having that guilt that I'm not there with the children or cooking or things like that, and kind of delegating some of that to someone else. And that's my answer of making the balance work the best you can.
Oh, that's a great piece of advice. Actually, I want to acknowledge my mother-in-law, Mary Anderson. Mary Lou was visiting us at one time and she said, "You need a cleaning lady." I'm like, "Not a chance. I do my own work around here. We're taking care of the garden. Now we have a gardener and a cleaning lady, and we just, pass off things that are not critical to outside support." So, Peter, anything to add to that?
I think most of it has been said, but important, you can't really do everything, so you have to let some stuff go. For me, it was basically I restricted my travel. I don't travel as much anymore to conferences, but you can't do everything, so it's important. And everyone, I mean, it was mentioned the family is very important, so work-life balance is important. And I mean, my kids are now almost all gone from the house, but before, I would work in the morning and at night, mainly on administrative stuff. And if I have something administratively, I close my door and finish that pretty quickly. Uh, Otherwise, I have my door open. Yeah, people can come and talk to me. Yeah.
I'll also add that I really feel there are phases and stages to life. Sometimes the best advice I got was from my mom, who said, they're young, they're not going to remember. Focus on your career and use this time maybe to be more, during your focus on your profession. And then later, when they need you, middle school, high school, maybe you at that stage of your life, you can pull it back. So I think there's phases and stages to everyone's life. In the context of work, and it's a push and pull where sometimes you're climbing and sometimes you're static, you're plateauing. So timing is everything, I feel, to this topic.
We all know that this topic is a hard topic, but we want to, these are great answers and practical tips. To kind of shift gears is, we wanted to also talk about what can faculty do to become involved in leadership early in their career? So how do they prepare themselves, to be a division chief, a medical director, or even a chair? So from your perspectives, as many of you said, you did fall into those roles. You weren't planning to do that, but we have several people on our calls or several faculty who are interested and would love to hear some practical tips from their current leaders. Kristen, do you want to start?
Sure. I think there's several things that people can do. I mean, we talked about it. You have to choose the right opportunities. It's sometimes hard to know that, but when they're, I think, looking for opportunities, I think also having a good mentor who's going to, like I say, not only mentor you, but support you and advocate for you can be helpful. And then, I think UC Irvine is amazing in that there are a variety of opportunities for leadership training and things like that. And then opportunities for leadership roles where you can implement what you've learned fairly quickly. And I think although there are great opportunities here at UC Irvine, but sometimes there are great opportunities, for example, in a national or international society that you're involved in whatever areas particularly of interest to you. So I think all of those are good. So looking for opportunities, again, having someone advocate or support for you, and then getting some education for leadership roles and things to help you.
Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I can look back and I can say that I was not prepared at all. And if I had known I would get in this role, I probably would suggest to do more service to learn the university system better because I had very little idea how these processes work. So to become a chair of some committees I mean, there's many opportunities in the medical school as well, uh, and learn how these things work university-wide as well, and get ready in that way. But I think most people just stumble into it, and you only realize what you should have done later on, right? So.
Shalini?
Yeah, I think from a very practical standpoint, at least to this audience, my advice would be to understand how healthcare works, particularly understanding how academic healthcare works. What are the drivers? What are the constraints? Just understanding, how decisions are made. What is a good decision? What's a quality decision versus what's the decision out of economic interest or, otherwise? um, Understanding, healthcare 101. You'll be surprised. I'm always surprised how very little training we get as physicians and how the industry functions. And then another thing that I did is, especially when I was a junior attending, I listened a lot to what back then was like just YouTube. I know now people listen to other things like podcasts or Spotify or I don't know, but I would just listen to a lot of industry leaders in other industries and how they approach their industry, and learning about leadership that way, what mistakes they've made, you know, how do you deal with the bad boss? How do you overcome bad leadership, things like that, and building your own resiliency and your understanding of you know um, uh, the industry itself. Yeah.
Shalini, to kind of just expand on your first recommendation about learning about the how healthcare works, what like practical recommendations? How do you go about doing that if you are a new faculty or kind of just earlier in your mid-career? What do you recommend to read, do to learn those things?
That's a really good question. I've got one book that I like that's actually here. I always recommend. I don't know if anyone's read this book, The Tyranny of Metrics. It talks about four different industries like education, healthcare, military. I forgot the last one, and it kind of talks about how these industries work and how performance metrics are created, or how we value certain metrics in each industry. It kind of explores each of these industries, particularly healthcare. What are the drivers of it? Who makes decisions? What are the implications of decisions? Academic research, things like that. So that's one book, but it's really, I just listened a lot to health economists like, is it Rahm Emanuel's brother? What's his name at Penn? Forgot his name. But he's a health economist, and listening to them, that's what I would recommend.
There's a Freakonomics podcast on medicine, which I'm blanking on the name of, but it's medical economics instead of.
Michael Porter's another one. Yeah.
Well, thanks for holding up the book. I wrote down the title.
Rob, what would you recommend for faculty who are interested into getting into leadership roles?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is ask yourself, what's your why? Why do you want to do it?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is it to get a line on your CV, or is it to have a greater impact in the population or the community that you serve, or across the country, or change how we do global health? But like, really have a why that you want to, because that's what's going to sustain you. It's important. If you're just chasing another title, or you just want to progress up the leadership ladder and have a C-suite office, that the motivation for doing that's going to wane after a while. So I would say, like, ask yourself, what's your why? Try and hang out with folks in positions that you might aspire to be. Like, most of us are really happy to mentor people and just hang out, have a conversation, get a cup of coffee, spend a half a day, see what it's really like. But that's also a really good source to make connections and figure out, like, is that something that I really want to do? I think Kristen can attest to it. Like, the chair of an academic medical department is kind of like being the complaint department. You really, you got it. And the farther along the trajectory you got to get used to not getting a lot of positive feedback. You got to be your own best cheerleader, because it really, you're not going to hear about it when you're doing a great job. You're only going to hear about it when things are not great. But hang out with folks jobs that you aspire to be. Read, I think, to Shalini's point, like it's like there are a lot of leadership books out there, like too many to read, but like investing some time and kind of reading up about what it's all about and what have the experiences been of not just leaders in medicine or healthcare economics, but in other industries. And if that sort of experience and impact resonates with you, then yeah, then leadership is probably right for you. And then I think to Kristen's point, like look for opportunities. There are a million opportunities here within the university, but also national or regional societies too. So if leadership is something that you're good at and you aspire to, yeah, you're gonna want to look for those opportunities, not just to hone your skills and become a better leader, but also to start assembling that resume of authenticity that says, yeah, I've been there, I've done this, I've done it really well, and I'm qualified for this position. Like that's how you do it. It's just like building that wall brick by brick. There's not a, you know, uh, it's like that old saying, like, there's no elevator to advanced leadership. You got to take the stairs. You just got to build it brick by brick.
Namisha, before we move on, how did you prepare for leadership?
I'm like everybody else on this call. I kind of fell into different things because opportunities came by and then I decided to take them. But now I'm being a little bit more strategic. I'm reading more and, just networking and learning from other people, as I think everyone mentioned on the panel.
And hosting training programs.
And hosting trainings. Yes. I learned a lot because I run the SAIL Leadership Academy. And with that, learning what is a good leader? What are different styles of leadership? Going through that whole process, actually, I think helped prepare me as well.
And I think, Namisha, like you're a perfect example. Like when you first started, you didn't really know what you were doing. But now the thing is blossomed to where you're our expert. Like we have one of our faculty members, Elena Rhodes, who just reached out to you about starting a high school women's health, academy on the summer. And so she came to me, pitched me the idea, and I'm like, you got to talk to Namisha. She's like the expert who knows how to do these things. And so even though like maybe not something you set out to do, you've done it enough and you've become really, really good at it. And now you are the go-to person. And that's just kind of how it works. Like, that journey of 10,000 miles starts with the first step.
I think you said something really important is that sometimes we think of career trajectory as moving up, but really it's going deep and really becoming an expert in your field or, growing roots in your field. Yeah, that's so true.
So we have a question from the audience. And the question is, how have you navigated a difficult or challenging leadership issue or leader that's above you who may have unrealistic expectations of what you should be doing or fails to support you? It's a two-part question, I think. So I don't know if anyone wants to take a stab at that one.
I think we've all been there. I see. I don't envy chairs by any means because they have a very, very difficult role being straddled between a lot of differing priorities, and primarily they're concerned with hindsight, oversight, and foresight, right? And sometimes those priorities may not agree with your personal priority or your group's priority, and it's hard. Just personally speaking, having I would say bad leadership, toxic leadership, or whatever phrase you want to use, it's really hard to navigate. I think one of the things that I've learned through that process I can share is that nothing is forever. People move on. And oftentimes, from my experiences, that those people typically I see will move their career every 5 to 7 years and moving from here to there, to there, to there. And so they typically do move on. I have felt, but I see that trajectory and moving place to place every 5 or 7 years and moving up the career ladder. But I also think that there's a lot of good work to be done, homegrown in our community where we are, and then that can kind of get overlooked. So my best advice is that those people typically do move on.
I would just add that in, every situation you have to kind of look at the particular situation and see what the opportunities are. But trying to communicate, is I think communication is important both up and down, right? So being able to communicate, relaying some of the challenges or whatever and problem solving. And then again, sometimes if I'm in a situation and I'm not sure what to do, then I reach out, obviously in an appropriate and confidential way, to a mentor or colleague or something like that to kind of, to problem solve and come up with a good approach to things. So I think being willing to again have that humility that you need to sometimes work with others to find a good solution to something, and then also again communicating.
I would just add, I think, to everything that Shalini and Kristen said, 100% agree. I think if it's a salvageable situation, then that second position perspective can be really helpful in trying to appreciate whatever the situation is from the perspective of your supervisor that seems to be hostile, like trying to understand what their priorities are and how you can best serve those priorities. I think that can be super helpful. And then I think surrounding yourself with supportive people in your network, both for the emotional and psychological support, but also having a cadre of people around you that know that you're doing a good job and know that you're trying, and that if things become more confrontational, having that assembly of supporters around you can sometimes give you more leverage than what you might think you would have.
Peter? Nobody's ever difficult in the basic sciences, right?
Exactly. I mean, no, I should say it has been pretty easy for us the last few years in that respect, but of course there have been situations, and the advice is, to listen. I mean, put yourself in the other person's shoe, obviously, and also have people around you that you can confidentially ask for guidance or advice. I think that's all that has been said, and that's very important. Yeah.
So one thing I would add, I don't know if this would apply to this situation, but I find if there's unreasonable expectations, oftentimes it's because the person with those expectations doesn't actually know all the things that you're doing. So, if they're asking you to do a certain thing that seems reasonable and they don't realize, but they also ask you to do two other things, and Dean Stamos is wanting you to do a third thing. So I think in those situations, it's often very helpful to map out, here are the things that, here's the things that I'm being asked to do, and going to that difficult person saying, I need your help to prioritize these things. So, my priority would be A, but I'm not clear that you don't prefer B or C, and what's your advice to me? And that way they have to step back and look at it and say, oh, I didn't realize you were doing all three of those things. I'd prefer you do number 2 and 3 and drop number 1. Or after that conversation, you can come back and say, it's impossible to do all three. I'm going to drop number 1. But at least you then had the communication both ways.
So the next question I want to ask our panel is, what steps are you all doing in your own roles to mentor and support faculty to become leaders here at UCI in academic medicine? So it's a very practical question, like what are things that you're doing to motivate and help this process occur? Kristen, do you want to start?
Sure. So I try to meet with all of our faculty twice a year, and we have them kind of fill out a little, development plan kind of thing. And then, at least at one of those meetings, but usually at both, we kind of think about, what have they been able to do? And then, what are they looking for? What opportunities do they want? What things do they want to have happen in their career? And then we brainstorm about, what are the possibilities and how I or administrators in the department or other faculty, usually the more senior faculty, can help them get there. Also, I think, every time an opportunity comes up at UC Irvine, I try to think, okay, who in our department is someone that I can support for this? And then, looking for opportunities, again, not just here at UC Irvine, there are many opportunities, which is great, but also, across dermatology for me, or other things that I encounter that are good opportunities for people.
Peter, what are you doing like on the basic science side?
Yeah, it's more a motivation thing because most people don't want to do any any leadership or any service to start with. So it's you have to show them that it's really fulfilling as well. It's not just, of course you have mostly people complain, but you can see your success, when junior faculty grow and get their funding, do great research for us. So that's very fulfilling and rewarding for what we do. And you have just to show that to people to motivate them to also take on some of these leadership roles. But have to say it's very difficult to motivate people to take on this extra burden to extra work basically. Yeah.
Well, I would put a plug in there and I agree with Peter that it's difficult to get people, particularly to do service. But if they want to do an accelerated merit, they're going to need something like outstanding service. And, service, the one thing I would say is if people, as you were saying, Peter, they come to you and they're complaining. If they're complaining about a thing, perfect. They should go, they clearly have an idea of how to fix it, how to make it better. So go join that committee and go off and fix it. And you can use it for your accelerated merit while you're at it.
Yeah,
Shalini?
no, I agree. That's certainly correct. And it's important to tell them to take on leadership roles in this service actually they're doing. So it's meaningful. I mean, there's a lot of service that has very little meaning. So it's one thing I always tell them, if you do service, take something that makes you have passion for and take on a leadership or make a change, not just sit there and do some service. Yeah. That's sort of the first step, I would say. I agree.
Shalini, what do you do as a division chief?
I mean, I could point to some specific examples, but my general philosophy, I believe, is just to be a facilitator. And to do that, I really have to understand how people work together. There's a lot of people work at what I call the above the waterline in an iceberg, and then there are some people who are a little bit more intuitive and they work at the interface line. But to really understand people's motivations, you really have to get below that waterline, in the iceberg and understand what makes people tick, how do people and teams work together. And that's probably one of the hardest parts for me to understand. What are people's motivations? You've got some people on your team who just want to be straight clinicians and hit that RVU target and exceed it. And, that's their motivation. And then there's others who really, their focus is, research. But how do you put those two people in a room and say, okay, let's work together so that the entire tide rises? And so I don't really have a specific answer for that. Certainly we have processes in place, but generally, more from a philosophical standpoint, it's really understanding how people work together or how people work and how they work together.
Rob?
Yeah, I think I would agree with everything that's been said. I think to follow up on Shalini's point, I think it starts with being a really careful and kind of radical listener for the junior faculty or trainees or whoever it is, and really trying to draw out from them what it is that they're good at and what it is that they want to do. And hopefully those two things intersect, because then they'll be happy, right? But you're not going to force somebody that just is a clinician and wants to drive RVUs to go write an R01. It's not going to happen. And I think one of the things I've learned over the last 10 years is that diversity is your superpower in the department, and you have to embrace that and cultivate that. Like, it's good. Like, you don't want everybody just doing the same thing. And so trying to find out from the individuals what it is really that makes them tick, what do they want to be doing, and then start trying. And if leadership is part of that, then that's great. Then we start talking about what opportunities there might be and what areas of leadership they want to further explore. One of the things we've tried to really hard to do is flatten the leadership structure within the department. When I took over 10 years ago, it was a very pyramidal structure, and we've tried to make that super flat. And so empower people, especially junior faculty, to take on leadership roles and support them in that, and get them advanced degree training if that's what's needed, or whatever will facilitate them developing an expedited expertise in that area is one of the things that we do with a very with aggression, right? Like that, it's important that we do that and encourage faculty to do the things that they want to do. But I think on a more microscopic level, once we have folks in those leadership roles, and they may not be fully fleshed out and comfortable in those roles, there's a little technique that I learned from a pharmaceutical rep that I worked with years ago, who used to be a commander in the Navy SEAL Team 6. And he said they have this thing called commander's intent when they're assigning their SEAL team to go off and do a mission. And the commander's intent is when the commander tells the SEAL team, this is the outcome that I expect. You guys need to figure out how to do it. Okay, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I expect you to whatever, take that bridge or take that hill or blow up that plane or whatever. That's it. That's what I expect. And you guys need to figure it. And that has been enormously helpful, especially for junior faculty, like not telling them how to do it, but having the patience to let them explore themselves and explore their own leadership potential and be problem solvers. And they come out of the end of that experience. Maybe it takes a little bit longer, but their confidence level is like, boom, it's at the ceiling, you know? So like employing that approach of commander's intent has been really, really valuable, especially for mentoring junior faculty.
That's some great advice.
If I can ask a quick follow-up question to that. On the converse side, suppose you have someone straight out of training, 1 year, 2 years out of training, and they're asking for a leadership role. How do you approach that? What do you say? Are there specific criteria you use, Dr. Bristow?
Yeah, I ask them, well, what do you want to, like, number one, what's your why? Like, why do you want it? Are you a good leader? Do you like to lead? Like, why do you want to be a leader? What does leadership mean to you? You know, like, are you really good at handling complaints? You know, but like, start with the why. And then if the why is like meaningful and appropriate, then we start talking about like what? Like, is it patient safety and quality improvement? Is it finances and accounts receivable? Are you thinking more on the hospital side or the department side? Do you want to run a clinic? Do you want to, like, what exactly is it that you're passionate about? Or is it a residency program director? Is it a clerkship director? Like, what is it? And so if we get past the why, and then can figure out what the individual area is, then we can start maneuvering around what potential opportunities there may be. But if we can't get past the why or a specific area, if somebody's just looking for a leadership title to put on their business card, we're probably going to have to circle back up in 6 months after they've had a chance to think about it a little bit more, But so I don't dismiss it. Absolutely not. Like, I think it's great. Like, we have a lot of young faculty in the department who have leadership roles. So I would never just dismiss it out of hand. But we gotta get past that smell test of like, okay, really, why do you want to do it, and what is it that you think you want to do? And then we can kind of hone down on where the opportunities are and what that stair-step trajectory would look like over the next 2, 3, 5, 7 years to advance along that pathway.
All right. Well, we have just a minute or two left. So really in closing, I just wanted to go to each of you and have you give an example of a success, a thing that you got from being a leader that you enjoyed, so that folks listening can, instead of thinking about the complaints and the difficulties and the balance, can think, yes, but Kristen closed by saying she did this wonderful thing. So we'll go to you last, Kristen, so you can think longer. How about Shalini? Can you tell us what's your favorite experience so far?
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's super, super easy. I really enjoy coming to work every day. I truly do. And I think all of our team members in our division enjoy. It's fun coming to work. We actually have a really great time. And so that's putting together a great team, people you admire, people you want to work with, people you learn from and grow from every day. And it's not just the doctors, it's really our nursing, our, prior front office, back office, everything. So that would be our success.
All right, Peter?
Yeah, for me, it's clearly, recruiting junior faculty and help them to achieve their goals and eventually become better than I have ever been. So that's the really fulfilling part I enjoy a lot, and it's very, very great to experience that.
All right, Robert?
Yeah, I think it's the mentorship and empowerment of the trainees and the junior faculty. Like that's why you get up and go to work and do the job. Somebody you get a resident or fellow that gets an oral plenary presentation at ASCO or something like that, something that you help them with and you force them to struggle through. That's like the best day ever. Or you get a faculty member that gets promoted or gets a leadership position within within the organization that they never thought they would be competitive for, but you coached them up and you encouraged them to do it, even though they thought they didn't, have any chance to do it, and then having them succeed. That's the best day ever, So yeah, it's like having that garden and planting the seeds, watering it every day for 6 months, and then you see those little sprouts come up, and you're like, that's it. It was worth it, 100%. So yeah, for me, that's what butters my bread is junior faculty, residency, and clinical staff mentorship, and seeing them grow and achieve and overachieve. That's kind of what it's all about.
Sounds exciting. Kristen, you want to close for us?
Well, I want to thank you for this session because I think all of the comments have been really great. And I just, I think that the part I enjoy the most is just trying to make the world a little better place. And there are so many ways that we can do that. I think all of the things that everyone said makes sense. So either by helping, mentoring someone or helping a patient out if you're in the clinical realm or a discovery, I mean, all of those things. And then leadership just gives you another opportunity, perhaps to help some more people make things a little bit better. So I think when we take those opportunities, then again, like everyone has said, you really feel like you've accomplished something that day.
Well, we want to thank our wonderful panelists for all these great words of wisdom, practical advice. And we hope this has really just helped you, start and think about your own path and journey on leadership. As we all say, and everyone's a leader in medicine, but we're trying to really focus on these, title roles. But also, I think we got very good advice from our great group of panelists. So thank you to Kristen, Shalini, Peter, and Rob for taking time out of your very busy schedules to hold this discussion and conversation. And thank you for everyone who attended. And please encourage your peers, your faculty, your leaders to, watch the link. It will be up on our website, and we'll see you guys next month. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.